Hello, I'm the Dark Master. In this video, we shall be reviewing the third game in the Kirby franchise and the first spin-off game in the series, Kirby's Pinball Land, or as it's known in Japan, Kabi no Pinboru. Just to clarify, a spin-off, for those who are curious, is a game that takes the gameplay mechanics, characters, or story elements and puts them within its own game that usually takes a separate and often vastly different direction, sometimes changing genres altogether. Sometimes these can be very good. Other times you end up with a forgettable, if not bad, experience. Where does Kirby's Pinball Land fall in this spectrum? Well, join me and we'll find out. As always, let's start off with its development history and trivia, for as little as there are. Kirby's Pinball Land's development is not nearly as well documented or as interesting as that of the first two games. This is likely because there wasn't as much thought in preserving this information due to it being a spin-off game. But still, some things can be said of note. First, this game represents the third pinball game HAL ever made. Those being previously Rollerball, made for the MSX Japanese home computer in 1984 and later getting an NES release. Then there was Revenge of the Gator, which was released in 1989 for the Game Boy. The development staff took lessons from those games and added upon them with more levels, boss fights, and even better graphics in some cases. This game also saw Tadashi Iketima's first involvement in the series as a composer. And frankly, I think he did a relatively decent job. Development in the end went smoothly, and the game would be released on November 27th, 1993 in Japan, November 30th, 1993 in North America, and December 1st, 1993 for the European Union. And it ended up selling even better than Kirby's Adventure, selling 2.19 million copies, likely due to being on the Game Boy, which was all the rage, plus it had the general appeal of pinball. So it ended up doing better than, ironically enough, the first console game. But now, let's go on to the game's plot, which is even more meager than the first game. Okay, so this game really has no story. I mean, technically it has an intro cutscene that sees Kirby walking down the road when suddenly the king falls down from the sky, assaults him, and then via some sort of magic he summons some pinball bumpers and flees into the air before Kirby becomes a ball and follows after the king to address this crime. That's it. I mean, it's understandable given it is a pinball game, an 8-bit one at that, so you really shouldn't expect a deep story. It's perfectly serviceable, but it's just nothing special. But again, you can't really expect that much for a game of this age and genre, but anyway. Now, let us go on to arguably the most important aspect of a game, the gameplay. Now, if I really wanted to make this segment as brief as the others, I could easily just sum it up as being 8-bit pinball, but I think more detail than that should be shown in really any review of any game. In terms of the basic controls, the start button pauses or starts the game. The select button allows one to enter the pause menu. The down or left D-pad arrow moves the left flipper and navigates the menu. The up or right D-pad can shake the machine from the left. The A button moves the right flipper or uses the springboard slash cannon, and the B button shakes the machine. Being a pinball game, you're supposed to try and get a high score with a limited number of lives. Unlike other contemporary pinball games, this game, however, has 4 boards instead of just one. Those being Wispy Woods Land, Krakow Land, Poppy Brothers Land, and King Dedede's board. The first of these 4 boards are divided into several sections with different enemies and formats, ending with a boss at the end. Something not common in pinball games even to this very day. King Dedede's board, however, is just an arena where you fight the king. Nothing more than that. Each of these boards, except the last one, has a secret minigame you gotta find. Wispy Woodlands features a minigame inspired by Breakout. Interestingly, this concept would later become the basis of its own spin-off game, Kirby's Block Ball, which shall get its own review in time. A spin-off to a spin-off. Huh. Krakow's Land's minigame has Kirby bounce food items up to a copy of himself, who will then eat them to generate points. Poppy Brothers Land has a minigame that sees Kirby having to score with a soccer goal, which has a squishy act as a goalie. Honestly, all these minigames are relatively easy and fun to engage with. The only one that can be slightly annoying is the breakout one, but that's not really still much of a challenge, frankly. In addition, several items also appear in this game. Some just give points. For example, the invincibility candy gives 3,000 points, while the mint leaf gives 1,000 points, and the super spicy curry gives 2,000 points. Bombs give bonus point additions, and cake gives point multipliers. Some of these are more useful though, like how the 1-up gives an extra life, obviously. The energy drink serves as a mean to prevent Kirby from falling through a gutter for a single time. The Maxim Tomato does the same, but for the pit between the flippers, offering some protection for a brief time period until it vanishes. The Warp Star takes Kirby to a different place when touched, and the Star Rod piece is collected after each boss is defeated. Now, as someone who does have some joy for pinball, I can say the mechanics worked really well. It controls perfectly fine for a game of the time, and I think the complaints it gets are mostly unfair given the expectations one should have when it comes to the limitations of the console. It is a perfectly well made game, and while it is not a perfect recreation of, real pinball machines, it still plays well enough that any inconsistencies are not that noticeable. But how does the game look? How are its graphics? Are those good? In terms of the graphics, it's honestly not that bad. I mean, of course, it's still an 8-bit game, and it reuses a lot of sprites from the first 2 games, and it's nowhere near as graphically brave. But I think that due to the nature of the character design of Kirby, Pinball Land is saved from being just an 8-bit pinball game, and each of the boards has its own aesthetics. Wispy Woods Land is a forest, Krakow's Land is cloudy, Poppy Brothers Land is sort of a carnival, and DDD is in an arena. I mean, it's serviceable, albeit some say it's a bit lazy, but I don't think you could really make completely new designs for some of these characters in 8-bit. It's serviceable, though admittedly nothing special. Much like the graphics, the music of Pinball Land is serviceable for what it is. Krakow's stage uses a slightly altered Bubbly Clouds theme from Kirby's Dream Land. Poppy Brothers Land uses Green's theme again from Kirby's Dream Land, which is fine, I think, because honestly, I really do like the music of those games, and so seeing them reused doesn't really detract from this game itself. You also see other reused music like Sparkling Stars for Once You Beat a Boss and the Kirby dance. Are these reuses a little bit lazy? Yeah, you can make an argument, but because the music itself is actually quite good, I don't really notice it that much. However, the game does have some new themes, which are kind of neat. The title theme gets you pumped to play the game. Wispy Woods theme sounds really energetic as the first level and makes you want to kick the guy's butt. It would, unlike all the other original music, return to this series in the form of Kirby's Dream Buffet. You got King Dedede's theme, which is a bit more carnival-like, and admittedly I don't like it as much as the OG King Dedede's theme, but it's also fine. But what about the foes that Kirby faces? How are the enemies in this game? Now, the game doesn't really have combo abilities, and so the enemies are all basically just points you can get or cameos like Waddle Doo, Meta Knight, or Squishy, and most are just returning foes in general. For example, you got Waddle Dees that give 5,000 points, Apple that gives 1,600 points, Broom Hatter that gives 10,000 points. Cappy can be hit twice, given 600 points the first time, then 1,200 points the second hit. Gordos give 240 points, Kaboo gives 240 points, Bronto Burt gives 3,600 points, Slippy gives 3,000 points, Mummies give 360 points, Twister gives 100 points per spin, a UFO gives 1,000 points, 1,500 points, or 2,000 points depending on where it is. Scarface gives 480 points, Twizzy gives 240 points, Mr. Bright gives 900 points, and Mr. Shine gives 1,800 points. There's Mr. Frosty who gives 480 points, Tukey that gives 1,000 points, Puppy Bros Jr. gives 250 points, or 500 points depending on their position, and then there's Bounder, who gives 480 points. In addition to these often recurring ones, you also get the last appearance of some of the old Kirby enemies like Flapper, Chucky, and Hurley. The game also introduced some new enemies, though most like the cloud-like Cloudy and the similarly cloud-like Nimbus have become forgotten in time. There's the Micro Scarfies that are a little more interesting, but again have been forgotten to time. But one of them, the Hatched Chick, also referred to as the Crack Tweet or Chick, would return in future games, so it is interesting to see that at least something in this game had somewhat of a lasting influence. But for more substance, we gotta go to the bosses of the game. Yes, bosses in a pinball game. Pretty impressive, to be honest. That's something that not even many pinball games these days have. First, you got Wispy Woods, who is pretty simple. He stands in place and will drop apples and Gordos, the latter of which can cause the bumpers to be disabled for a bit, but you can block them in time if you do it right. He must be hit 8 times to be defeated. Krako's fight has 2 phases. The first is Krako Jr., who floats around and tries to occasionally ram at Kirby. You gotta hit him about 4 times. The second phase is his mature form that floats around and occasionally summons flippers to attack Kirby. It will also shoot lightning that can stun the bumpers, and unlike the Gordos, can't really be prevented from doing so, so it's a little more dangerous. He must be hit an additional 5 times in the second form. It's honestly somewhat of a fun fight. The lightning is a great deal more of a threat than that of the similar attack by Wispy, so it gives a bit of more of a challenge. But nothing too hard. Poppy Brothers Sr. has seen an upgrade from mini-boss status to boss. He'll jump around and toss bombs that can stun the bumpers. After getting hit 3 times, he will then split in twine, and each must be attacked a further 3 times to defeat them. I consider him a bit easier than Krako due to the lack of lightning, but is harder than Wispy Woods due to his erratic movement that isn't quite as easy to hit as the stationary tree. The final boss is, of course, King Dedede, and I've actually talked about this fight in a previous video, so consider checking that out if you're interested in learning more about it, as well as my opinions on the various boss fights of the King throughout the series. But truly, it is the best fight in the game. No, best experience in the game, with 3 phases. First, we see the King standing in a spotlight, fitting his egotism, as he tosses bombs, which Kirby has to hit him or avoid the bombs. The second phase sees King Dedede floating around, and the third phase sees King Dedede. Firstly, the lights go on, but he starts pulling a Darth Sidious, shooting lighting out of his hands as he jumps around. Overall, a good fight, though the second phase is honestly pretty easy. So overall, the collection of foes in this game is somewhat lacking. I mean, all the returning enemies are nice to see, and the new enemies have kind of been forgettable, but the bosses still stand above most pinball games, and so for that reason, I still think there's some merit to them. However, now let us talk the completion requirements of this game and my final thoughts. This game is one of 2 in the franchise that doesn't have a 100% completion bonus. Indeed, the only thing you get when you beat Dedede is the ability to find a cameo of Meta Knight if you break all the stars in the area that appears alongside Mr. Shine. Otherwise, it just loops endlessly until you run out of lives. There's also some code you can use to either play the minigames or a boss rush, but you don't actually learn those in the game itself. So, however, while there is no true completion bonus, and you can put it down after beating the king, it only takes about an hour to do so, so I think it's more than worth it. If only to get the most out of the game. You can even go out your way to find the Meta Knight cameo if you really want to. It doesn't really take that long. So overall, what are my overall thoughts? Well, for the first spin-off of the franchise, it's honestly alright. It manages to overcome the basic pinball banality thanks to the unique gameplay additions and cheerful graphics, which, while reused, still are perfectly fine. It has some decent music, and is it deep? Heck no. But I can say it's worth playing to completion at least once. A lot of people say it's hard, but aside from the occasional bullshit in certain boss scenarios, I think it's pretty fair for a game of this time. Now, normally I'd end the video here, but before I do so, I want to give a shout out to 2 amazing people that I haven't been able to up to this point. First, I want to shout out the amazing YouTuber named The Game Controller Network. This man gave me a shout out in his recent Kirby Right Back At Ya Season 3 review. He's a very nice and good YouTuber that you should check out. While his videos do not go in as much detail as mine, they more than make up for it in pure charm and humor, as well as a lot of interesting commentary that I think will be funny to anyone who gives it a view. Go subscribe to him if you haven't already, and you'll see a lot more Kirby videos from him if you are interested in that sort of thing. I'll have his thing linked in the description down below. I also want to shout out someone who has contributed to my channel, my brother. He makes his thumbnails for my Kirby Right Back At Ya retrospective and the occasional one-off videos. As you can tell, they are of far higher quality than my own thumbnails, which, let's be honest here, are either auto-generated by YouTube or just garbage. He recently published his first book in what will be a fantasy trilogy, inspired by the great literature of J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis. So, if that is of any interest in you, you can buy it in the link below in the description. Especially do it if you like to support independent artists. Anyway, I'm the Dark Master, and if you liked this video, like it, but if you loved it, consider subscribing and have a wonderful day.